When I met David, I was new to online dating. I joined a free dating site last summer, and I didn't want to meet a man who wasn't near me. I had a 30-mile radius on my search bar and profile. I put up a photo of myself taken recently, and my intentions were clear. I'm in search of a working professional man, no hang-ups, and kids are okay. I work with a friend of mine, and we run an online clothing business, so I was home a lot, but during business hours it was online orders and we shipped out of my garage, as well as made clothing out of my garage. I divorced years ago, and I've been on a few dates and nothing really serious, and I'd hoped to meet someone business-minded like me. I guess I had this fantasy of meeting a great man and building a business empire with him. When David messaged me, I thought he was cute. His profile picture looked like he was in business, and his profile section said he was a trader of gemstones. I sent him a wink sticker and waited to see if he'd reply. And he did. The next day he sent me a paragraph about how he is 48 years old and a trader of precious gemstones and gold. He was a widow. His wife had died of cancer 4 years prior, and he had a daughter named Jenny who was 10 years old. He said he wasn't always on the site and asked if I had an email address so we could, quote, communicate better. I was okay with this, as I communicate with my customers via email more than anything, and I foolishly gave him my work email address. A few minutes later, I received an email from him with a long story about his life. How he was the only child of his late parents. He was born in Poland, but went to school in Switzerland. His parents died in a plane crash, and he was raised by his very strict uncle. He came to the USA for college and met his wife, married, and built his business. Then his wife died from kidney cancer and left him with his daughter alone. He said he stayed single to raise his daughter, but felt so lonely. His daughter was in boarding school, and he worked abroad a lot. He said he just got back from Ghana, where he did a multi-million-dollar trading of gold and buying for his company, which he said was called Ultra Unlimited Gemstones and Gold LLC. He gave me the link to his company website, which it looked very legit. I replied to him and told him my business and where I lived. His profile said he lived in Orlando, and I lived in Sanford. It was nearby enough. He said, though, that he was currently in New York City on business and then would fly back to West Africa to do another deal, this time on some gemstones. He would be gone for 3 weeks and then return to Orlando, and his daughter would be coming home for school break. They would go to Disney World while she was away from school. He even invited me, but I found that to be way too soon, especially to meet his daughter. He gave me his phone number, which was an Orlando area code, and he asked for mine. I was hesitant at first, but went ahead and gave it to him, both my business number and my cell phone number. He inquired about my business quite a bit, asking how much revenue I make, my outgoing costs, vendors, etc. He was very intrigued and really asked a lot of questions, as if economics and business were his thing. I felt fine telling him some things about my revenue. He ended up calling me on the phone one night, and we spoke for about an hour. The connection was poor, and he sounded like he was in a tunnel. He had a very thick accent, but I couldn't place it. He said he was a mix of Polish and Swiss. He was a little pushy, though, asking more about my revenue, all about my revenue. And he asked if I was hiring. I explained to him that it's just my friend and I who run this business from my garage. We're not a major company. We buy and sell clothing online, market clothing, make vintage-looking clothing, and we also print shirts for large functions such as church groups. I had screen printing machines in my garage. We'd been doing this for years. He started to become more romantic, sharing music video links, songs, poems with me, and as time went on, and then he left for his trip. We were not an item, but I admit he was very caring, and it was nice. We did talk about maybe meeting for dinner when he returned from his trip to West Africa. The night before he left for his flight, he gave me his daughter's school email address and said sometimes the connection was poor in West Africa and wanted me to have her email in the event that anything might happen, I could email her. I felt awkward. I told him I wouldn't email her, but if there was an emergency, I might. but he kept pushing me to introduce myself to his daughter. I felt that too soon, and I considered him just a new friend, not a lover or a boyfriend. He left for his trip, and I didn't hear from him for a day or so, and then he arrived at his destination, but he said his hotel room reservation had issues as he had to stay with his business contact at his home until it could be sorted. Something about his credit card not being held to reserve the room correctly, but he wasn't worried. I told him I hope it's fixed soon, and he said his business connection lived in the countryside and he was sleeping on the floor of his business friend's home. I told him the hotel should sort things soon, and I wished him a good night. I didn't hear from him for about 3 days, which was unusual as he always emailed me song links, pictures of flowers, and he always wished me a good morning and a blessed day. Then I received an email from his daughter. I imagine he gave his daughter my email address, and she asked if I'd heard from her daddy, and I told her no, but I'm sure he's probably busy working. She introduced herself in an email and said she was 10 years old and couldn't wait to go to Disney World with me. I told her to take care, keep studying in school, and I felt very uneasy emailing someone's child. I kept it brief. Soon, though, I received a call from a number I didn't know. It was a +233 country code, which was Ghana. The man said his name was Mr. Agobi. He said he was a police officer for the Ghana police and that David had been the victim of a robbery and was in the hospital with amnesia, and that they found my contact information in the pocket of his jacket. The police officer said David had been robbed in the night while sleeping on the floor of a home, that this area of town was very bad and he was being targeted for being a wealthy foreigner. I asked where David was, and he said he was at a local hospital and gave me the number of the hospital. He asked me if I was his wife, to which I said no, just a friend. He replied to me with something that was like, "Really, that's it?" which I found kind of odd. He said I could reach the hospital via that number. I hung up and called the number. A woman answered and said she was a nurse for Tamale West Hospital in Tamale, Ghana, and asked me who I was talking about. I told her about the police officer and about David, and she said, "Oh yes, the foreigner who was robbed." She told me to hold, and then a man named Dr. Coffey came on the phone and said David was in critical condition with swelling and bleeding, and they needed to do surgery due to his wounds, but needed a deposit to ensure payment. He said in Ghana you're required to pay, and David was not awake, and he asked me for the deposit. I asked him how much the deposit was and what surgery he needed. He told me they needed to stop the bleeding, and the deposit for surgery was $1,700. I was shocked, and I told them to please call David's company. Surely someone can help at the company. They said they only had my contact information, as David was robbed of his wallet, briefcase, and all contacts. As I spoke to this doctor, I was going to David's website to try and contact the other staff, as the website had other staff listed with their photos. I emailed each person listed on the website, including the co-owner, but no one replied while I was on hold with the doctor. The doctor went off the phone for a few moments and came back saying David has taken a turn for the worst and they must have the payment for the surgery right away. I asked how I could pay, and they told me with a bank transfer to the hospital administrator. He gave me the name of a man who was supposed to be the financial administrator of the hospital. He told me to transfer it to the bank account and please give the transfer number and, if possible, email a copy of the bank transfer or take a photo of the transfer, and he gave me an email address of the hospital, or so I thought. And I felt so much pressure on the part of that, and I felt bad for his daughter. I thought for sure his work partners would contact me soon and send me the money back, or David would pay me back as he wasn't lacking in funds. This poor man lying in a hospital bed in medical trouble and needing help. I ended up doing a bank transfer from my business account to the account given to me in Ghana. I emailed a copy of the transfer information to the email they gave me, and I waited. In the meantime, David's daughter emailed me asking if I'd heard from her daddy. I didn't want to scare this poor child, so I told her that her daddy is okay, just pray for him, and that I'm helping him to feel better. She said okay and asked if I was going to be her new mommy. I only replied with, "Your daddy will be okay." Hours later, I ended up getting a phone call from the doctor who said the surgery was a success, but now he needed to be treated with 15 days of medication. He said the medication would be $200 a day and asked me how many days I could pay for. By this time, I had not heard from any of David's business contacts. I was upset and I reached out to them again. I told the doctor that his company should help pay and gave him the email of his business contacts and asked him to reach out to them. But the doctor said he had no time. He had other patients that can afford care. How cruel, I thought. I ended up feeling more pressured, and I paid for his medication. I waited to hear from David and prayed he would be okay. During these days, I would get email updates from the hospital, and the woman I first talked to called twice a day to say David was improving but unable to speak. I then stopped hearing from all of them, including the daughter. I tried to call and email with no reply. The phone would just ring and ring, then disconnect. I thought to find another number for the hospital, so I Googled the name of the hospital. I found a totally different number for the hospital and called it. They informed me no one fitting this name or description was there, let alone a robbery victim who was a foreigner. They advised me that I might be caught up in a scam. I ended up researching the number to the hospital that was given to me, and it came up on romance scam sites. I felt so angry and stupid. I then received an email from David's daughter asking about her daddy. By this time I had read story after story about this so-called David and the daughter and using this number to scam people. The daughter emailed again and asked for an iTunes card so she can try calling her daddy. I marked her email as spam as I realized I was a victim. I told my story on a few scam reporting sites and have since moved on with my life and away from dating sites. Beware of scammers going after your good heart. Well, we'd like to thank this lady for sharing her story. If you'd like to share your scam encounter, you can find us via email, scammingscammers@gmail.com. We are also back on Facebook under the page Scamming Scammers Cyber Education. Share your story with us. We will verify it and narrate it into a video. Please provide as much information as possible. You can provide photos that were used by the scammer and any information you might find that could help us to investigate. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time.